Great. So thank you very much, Stu, for the invitation. And yes, I'm going to be talking about science, particularly about B3, Better Border Biosecurity, but I'm also going to be talking about the National Science Challenge and also about the Bioprotection Research Centre. All of these are providing science underpinning for the biosecurity sector. Now, I just want to say here that I hope this goes okay, this talk. I have trouble with my scientific colleagues trying to explain some of this stuff. So, what was that? Somebody's telling me off. So really, I just want to introduce a couple of concepts to you about the science system. Actually, we've already had one of them introduced to you, and then talk about those three research entities and try and give you a bit of a feel about what they do and how they're involved in the biosecurity sector. So we've already seen this slide in another form. So this is John's net form to some extent. And I want to point it out to you and just reinforce what John says, that the border biosecurity is a continuum, and it starts with organisms offshore and comes through right to organisms that become permanently established in New Zealand. And that's the biosecurity system. And John also pointed out that the return on investment is probably a lot better the earlier you catch something in the system. So that's where B3 exists, Better Border Biosecurity. So some years ago, 15 years ago, I think, it was determined that there wasn't enough research going on in this area, and that B3, the CRIs, came together and decided to work together in this area, partly because the border, sorry John, I'm talking about the border. The border is a non-sectorial area. It's a port, it's an airport, or it's an urban environment. So that's one of the reasons that B3 came together. Now, the other groups I'm talking about, the other entities I'm talking about, Biological Heritage and the Bioprotection Research Centre, work over the whole continuum, so including pest management as well. So that's the first concept which you already want to know, which you've already had some introduction to. The second is this one, and this is, it may be out of date, 2019, but this is a sort of a schematic of the science investment system. Now, if you look at the axes, the top axes, we have research that is investigator-led right through to user-led. And on the other axis, the vertical axis, we have research that is institutional or decided by the institutions or negotiated with their funding bodies, right down to the competitive, and that's where you compete to get funding in the science sector. You can also see from that there are different sources of science investment. So MB is one of them, TEC, which is the Tertiary Education Commission, is another, MPI is another, and I'll show that on my next slide. You can see where some of the entities sit on this this landscape. So you can see B3 there. I don't have a pointer. Do I have a pointer?
You can use the mouse on the other little bit.
This mouse here.
Yeah, that should. Does it show you?
It's not working. Anyway, so you can see B3 there in blue. So it's slightly at the negotiated end and sitting there between investigator-led and mission-led. We have the Bioprotection Research Centre, or one of the National Science Cores, which is more at the competitive end and much more at the investigator-led fundamental end, and I'll go into some of this in a bit more detail. You can see Biological Heritage National Science Challenge there in brown, in another position on this landscape. You can also see MPI there, and GIA and Zespri as well. So some of the other factors to this landscape. We also have endeavour programs, and I've got bees as biomonitors, so that's closely working with B3 as well. So you can see a whole lot of different aspects to the biosecurity system in terms of where science comes from. I think it does, yes. I'm pretty sure it does. So the question was, does the size of the circles denote dollars? I'm pretty sure it does. So in these different landscapes, we have, I'm going to be talking about B3, biological heritage, and the plant biosecurity research. The Bioprotection Research Centre, and they have a different focus, each of them. Their investment comes from different places, and they're in slightly different places in the plant biosecurity system, continuum. So B3, good. So B3 is where I am, so I know more about this than others. So B3 is main aim is to stop organisms coming into the country. And the reasons for that, I think, are clear. We've gone over some of them today. So we're trying to maintain the welfare of the environment, preserve biosecurity, but also there's a strong economic aspect there about plant production, but also market access, and we've touched on that today. B3 is a CRI-based entity, so this is the CRIs putting their money into B3 for research, and it's about 15 years old. So here we are, it's a partnership collaboration between 4 of the land-based CRIs. That's Agri-Search, Plant Foods, Scion, Ngāti Whenua, plus the Bioprotection Research Centre at Lincoln. And our primary industry end users are MPI DOC, the Environmental Protection Agency, and then members from the sectors. Our aim, science-based solutions to reduce the establishment of pest diseases and weeds, and we're targeting both the productive and natural plant systems. This is a diagrammatic representation of B3, and I'll go into a bit more detail in the next slide, but really this is just to show that there are 5 themes that we're working on, and they're all targeting different parts of the biosecurity continuum, but they're all linked. And then we have a core basis of characteristics for the program. So B3 is asking fairly straightforward questions in the different themes, and these are them. So what are the risks to New Zealand? And in this, we look at both risks from introduced biocontrol agents, so we term those intentional introductions, so we want to make sure that anything that we intentionally bring into New Zealand will not cause harm. Also, clearly, we're looking at unintentional introductions, so those are the pests and diseases and weeds that really nobody wants in the country as well. We also work in pathway risk management, so what are the high-risk pathways and how do we close them and manage them? And then we need to be able to identify the organisms in these pathways. So can we identify pests and diseases when they get here? It's very important to know if it's a pest or not, if it's here already or not. So we have a lot of research looking at that and different ways of doing that. And then lastly, our last theme is surveillance and response and eradication. So can we detect the incursions as early as possible so we can improve our chances for eradication? So that's B3, working very much at the border end of the scale. The other research entity I want to talk about is the New Zealand's Biological Heritage National Science Challenge, and its mission is to reverse the decline of New Zealand's biological heritage through a national partnership to deliver a step change in research innovation, globally leading technologies, and community and sector actions. So this was established in about 2014 and is one of 11 national science challenges. It has a much broader concept than B3, so it's looking at animals, plants, terrestrial and freshwater, as well as issues associated around the border, but also long-term pest management. It very much has a collective approach, 18 parties from the CRIs, from the universities and government organisations. It also works widely with community interests, including a very strong focus on iwi. It then works through the process of bringing those people together to target national scale impacts and benefits for for New Zealand Aotearoa. This is the area that they're currently working in, so they're in tranche 2, the second, I think, tranche of 5 years, and looking at these major impacts. So Whakamana, empowering communities largely. Tiaki, protect, that's where the biosecurity focus is. And then whakahau, or restore, so that's looking at resilient ecosystems. So we're working closely, particularly with them in the protect area, number 2 there, and there's a major new project in looking at the risks, the quadruple bottom line that John was talking about in terms of risk assessment. Quite an important project there. The third entity that I want to talk about is the Bioprotection Research Centre. It's interesting that all of these organisations are based at Lincoln. It's actually quite useful, but it's something I just realised that while I was preparing this talk. So this is a National Centre of Research Excellence, or a core, and these are funded from, again, another part of the science funding. Well, this is actually tertiary education funding, so it's education funding. Again, they have a number of partners. They were established in 2002, and their focus is really on fundamental research, but also postgraduate capability training. Their focus is also on plants, but again, they look at the whole of the biosecurity continuum from the border right through to long-term pest management. Here, I just really want to emphasise their focus is fundamental, and these are the themes that they have, looking at evolutionary biosecurity, for example, enhancing biological control, looking at pathogen specificity, and ecosystem networks. So very much their focus is on fundamental aspects to bioprotection, biosecurity, whatever you want to call it. They have just been through a new bidding program and were successful. So they're up again for continued funding. And the major change that they will be looking at, and I just need to grab my slides here, is that they are looking at this Taiawa. I'm not going to try and pronounce that again. Thank you very much. Which is really taking their fundamental focus with a greater interaction with the community. So, and again, a much greater emphasis on partnership with Maori there. So, Stu, I think I'm down to my last slide. I've just got to find my notes, catch up on my notes again. So you've seen 3 entities. I've talked about B3, which is something I know a lot about. I've talked about the Biological Heritage National Science Challenge, which is big picture, integration across the systems. And I've talked about the Bioprotection Research Centre, which is focused on fundamental science and capability development. Yeah, the fact that we're all in Lincoln is quite useful, because the 3 directors from these organisations often get together just with informal chats over coffee to make sure that we are integrating together. But there is a lot more than that going on to create the integration between those organisations. So we have shared strategies. B3, for example, is fully aligned to the Biological Heritage National Science Challenge. And so we are targeting their strategies as well. We have similar objectives. We try and integrate our funding. So we share funding in some ways. So, you know, Bioprotection Research Centre might focus on the real fundamental side of stuff. We'll focus on the more applied stuff, and actually then we'll work with industry to implement that applied stuff. Our partners overlap. Small place, New Zealand. So we have the same discussions going on between our partners. Our board members overlap, and we've had occasions where we've had all the boards meeting together at the same time to try and keep the direction of 3 organisations moving in the similar direction. We advise each other. We have similar advisors there, and we have shared project leaders. And of course, we have you, the people of New Zealand, Industries of New Zealand, iwi, other communities as our stakeholders. So, yeah, and then we have our link, of course, on this slide to Zespri and KVH, and possibly I should have put a Biosecurity New Zealand logo on here rather than an MPI logo. But we are well integrated with those organisations as well to get the implementation of our science taken up. So thank you very much, Stu. Yeah, so the question is, we do the research, but MPI has the clout. MPI has a very strong influence on what we're doing. The money actually is, in some cases, the money we work with does come from MPI, so when that is the case, they have the clout. But the money is, we're answerable to the Ministry of MB, what is that? Business, Innovation and Employment. Or the Bioprotection Research Centre is answerable to TEC, the Tertiary Commission of Education. But as I say, MPI is fully integrated with B3 right from governments through the development of projects, through the implementation of projects. So they have a very strong say in what we do. And anybody from MPI want to expound on that at all? I think we can't underestimate how important they are to us. Good question. So the question was around COVID and how it's impacted us. It's interesting in several ways, and I think John has already pointed out that we don't have tourists coming in, so one of the pathways is gone. And there has been, I read in the surveillance magazine that there actually has been a reduction of responses, something like that anyway, as associated with that. I think it was a March to March comparison. For research, it's a problem because a lot of our research is done overseas, and it's either done by us overseas or by our partners overseas. So our partners are either locked up, and we certainly can't go overseas. So we have two major projects within B3. I've got time to talk about this, haven't I? We've got two major projects in B3 that are heavily impacted by COVID. One is looking at Xylella fastidiosa in California. So in California, there are a whole lot of New Zealand native trees planted all over the landscape, and Xylella fastidiosa is endemic in the area. So we can actually go to California and get some idea of what of the impact of Xylella on those plants, but we can't go there at the moment. So that's one of them. The other one is we have a major focus on China. China is brown marmorated stink bug, spotted wing Drosophila, spotted landed fly, all come from that area. PSA might have come from that area. So it's an area we know is, there's an argument we've got all the pests and diseases from England, Europe, North America. We probably haven't, but Asia is an area that we probably haven't. And we have a major program there which we're really struggling with. So those are two of the impacts that we major impacts.